A shy girl undergoes breast augmentation surgery, shockingly. Her doctor is a young millionaire and… The rain tapped gently against the windows of the small cafe in downtown Seattle. But inside, the tension was anything but soft. "Be honest, Claire," Tyler's voice sliced through the murmur of coffee machines and distant jazz. "Do you really think I stayed with you because you're cute?" Claire Weston, 26, sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea she had barely touched. Her blonde hair framed a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "You're sweet," he continued, waving a hand in the air like he was describing a pet. "You're obedient. You're safe. But Claire, you're boring. You're like cardboard. And your chest," he chuckled without warmth, tapping the table with his knuckles. "Flatter than this table." The words echoed in her ears long after they were said. She stared at him, her face pale, her lips slightly parted as if they might form a protest, but nothing came. Her throat tightened. Her knuckles whitened around the mug. You're serious?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, strained and cracking under the weight of disbelief. Tyler stood up, unhurried. "I'm done pretending," he said, slipping his coat on as if he had just wrapped up a business transaction. "I need someone who makes me feel alive. Someone who turns heads when she walks in. You're not that girl, Claire. You never were." He dropped a few bills on the table, enough to cover his espresso but not the devastation he left behind. Without another glance, he strode to the door, pushed it open, and just beyond the glass, a woman in tight jeans and crimson lipstick stepped into his arms as if they had practiced it. The cafe door chimed softly behind them. Claire didn't move. Around her, life went on, spoons clinked, coffee steamed, someone laughed too loudly, but she was somewhere else entirely. Her tea had long gone cold, like the part of her heart that used to hold Tyler's name. A young waitress passed their table and gave Claire a fleeting glance, one that said, "I saw, but also I won't ask." Then she disappeared into the hum of the cafe. Outside, the drizzle became a downpour. That night, Claire stood in the fluorescent light of her cramped bathroom. The mirror was small and scratched, framed by cracked tiles. She stared at her reflection like she was meeting it for the first time, and not in a good way. Her blonde hair fell limp around her face. Her blue eyes looked dulled, like the color had drained out of them. She reached up and slowly unbuttoned her blouse, each movement mechanical, distant. Her collarbones were sharp, her chest flat beneath a faded camisole. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over her skin, unfamiliar and unforgiving. She couldn't stop hearing his voice. "Cardboard. Flat. Not enough." She whispered to the girl in the mirror, "Am I really that? Invisible?" No answer came. She slid down the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. The cold floor seeped into her skin, but the numbness inside her was worse. Her phone buzzed from the sink counter. A notification. Instagram. Tyler had posted a story. Her heart clenched as she opened it. There he was, at a bar. That same red lipstick woman beside him, laughing, radiant. Her body full, curved, her head on his shoulder. The caption read, "Finally with someone who gets me." Claire's stomach dropped. She pressed her forehead to her knees, willing herself not to cry. But the tears came anyway, hot, bitter, unstoppable. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone again, opened Google. She didn't think, she just typed. Discrete breast augmentation Seattle. A clinic appeared, private 5 stars, glowing testimonials. She stared at the screen, her chest heaving, her heart breaking in silence. She bookmarked the page. Still on the floor, Claire pressed a hand to her chest as if trying to feel something, anything, beneath the skin. A heartbeat. A reason to believe she was still enough. But all she felt was emptiness. Under the buzz of the flickering bathroom light, Claire whispered to the quiet, "If I change, maybe I'll finally be worth staying for." And the mirror didn't argue. It simply reflected her pain, silent and merciless. The lobby of the private clinic was unlike any Claire had ever seen. No sterile white walls, no sharp chemical scent. Instead, there were warm earth tones, soft jazz playing in the background, and a faint hint of lavender in the air. It felt more like a high-end spa than a surgical center. Still, her heart pounded. She had checked in at the front desk under the name Anna Lee. The receptionist hadn't blinked. Discretion, after all, was their promise. Claire sat in the waiting area, her palms slick against her jeans. She wore a simple sweater, her blonde hair pulled into a low ponytail. Her makeup was minimal, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. In her purse, she clutched a folded piece of paper, questions she had planned to ask, just in case she forgot how to speak. A door opened. A nurse called her name, her borrowed name, and led her down a quiet corridor. Claire followed, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. When they reached the consultation room, the nurse gestured for her to wait. Moments later, the door opened again, and in walked Julian Reeves. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, dressed in dark slacks and a soft gray sweater under his white coat. No tie. His sleeves pushed up slightly, revealing forearms that looked strong, capable. But it was his eyes that caught her breath, calm, steady, not invasive, just present. He offered her a small, almost amused smile, as if he could sense the storm behind her silence. "Anna, right?" he said gently, extending his hand. She nodded, hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm, steadying. He sat across from her, opened her file. "So," he said, tone careful but not cold, "what brings you here today?" Claire stared at her hands. The room suddenly felt much too quiet. Her throat tightened. Words sat behind her lips like stones. Julian waited. Then he closed the file. "Let me guess," he said, voice softer. "You are not here because you hate your body. You're here because someone else convinced you it is not enough." Her head jerked up. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Julian leaned back. "It happens more than you think. Someone we trust says something that slices deeper than a scalpel ever could. And we come here, thinking maybe we can stitch that wound with a procedure." Claire's eyes welled, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let them fall. He didn't push, just watched her with that same, quiet patience. Julian tapped her file lightly. "I will help you," he said clearly. "If and only if you are doing this for yourself. Not to win back someone who did not have the decency to love you right." The air left Claire's lungs in a rush. She stood suddenly, chair scraping behind her. I should go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This was a mistake. She turned toward the door. Julian stood too, but he didn't block her way. Instead, he reached out gently and placed a hand on her shoulder, not to stop her, but to let her know he was still there. "You can stay," he said softly. "Not as a patient, just as someone who deserves kindness, respect, dignity." Claire froze. No one had said those words to her before, not in a way that felt real. She didn't speak, just sat back down slowly, hands still trembling. Julian offered a glass of water. She took it. They didn't talk much after that. He asked a few medical questions, kept the rest simple. His eyes never strayed, never judged. When the consultation ended, he gave her a card with his number, not the clinic's. A note scribbled beneath, for questions, big or small. As Claire stepped back out into the Seattle drizzle, she looked up at the sky for first time in days. It was still gray, but something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, stirred. Hope. The white sheets felt too clean, too still. Claire lay there, the hum of machines around her, the muted drip of IV fluid beside her bed. The surgery was over. Successful, according to the nurse's brief words. Minimal complications. Smooth recovery ahead. But the room was silent. No phone calls, no flowers, no waiting friends or family. Just the slow ticking of the clock and the ache in her chest, not from the incisions but from the emptiness. Claire turned her head slightly and stared at the window. The Seattle sky was its usual shade of overcast gray. Raindrops tapped against the glass like a metronome, matching the rhythm of her thoughts, steady, relentless, cold. Sometime during the afternoon, her eyelids grew heavy. She drifted off, her arms curled around a small, worn leather notebook tucked under the blanket with her. It was the only thing she'd brought, aside from her clothes, her lifeline. Hours later, the door opened softly. Julian stepped in, clipboard in hand. His footsteps were light but deliberate. He didn't expect her to be awake. When he saw her, slouched to one side, sleeping with one hand still loosely gripping the edge of the blanket, his gaze softened. He checked the monitors quietly, made a few notes. Then, as he turned to leave, he noticed the notebook slipping from her grasp. Gently, he reached to place it on the nightstand. But as it tilted open, something inside caught his eye. A sketch. Just a single drawing, done in pencil. The lines were light but haunting. A girl sat alone in the corner of a page, hunched and small, her knees pulled to her chest. But behind her, faint, uncertain, were wings. Not fully formed, not yet spread, just beginning to grow. Julian froze. He stared at the image for a long moment, his breath catching unexpectedly. It was not the skill of the drawing that struck him, it was the soul inside it. The quiet cry for emergence. The ache of someone who had been folded so long she had forgotten she was capable of flying. He closed the book carefully, placing it where it would not fall again. Then he stood there, looking down at Claire, her brows slightly furrowed even in sleep, her breathing slow and shallow. "She's trying," he whispered. "She's trying to fly." That night, long after his shift ended, Julian didn't go home. Instead, he remained in his private office upstairs. A set of watercolors lay unopened on the shelf, a gift from a patient who once said she hoped he'd one day use them. Tonight he did. He did. On thick paper, he painted. With a steadiness not unlike surgery, he let color breathe life into the sketch he had seen. The same girl, now with wings blooming in vibrant hues of blue and violet, standing with her back to the light, no longer caged in a corner, but stepping forward. By dawn, it was done. The painting sat quietly inside a thin wooden frame. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, he wrote a single sentence: "You have wings, even if you cannot see them yet." At 6 a.m., Julian returned to Claire's room. She was still asleep, her face turned toward the window where morning fog pressed gently against the pane. He placed the painting on her bedside table. When Claire woke an hour later, the first thing she saw was not the white ceiling or the IV drip. It was the painting. She blinked, sitting up slowly. Her hands reached out before her thoughts could catch up. She stared at it. Her lips parted. The girl, the wings, the message. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She looked around the room, but Julian was gone. For the first time since the day she walked into the clinic, Claire smiled, not because someone gave her something, not because she looked different, but because someone had seen her, really seen her. Not the outside, not the surface. Her. The quiet, aching, broken part that was trying to become whole. She clutched the painting to her chest and closed her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Claire was no longer the girl who cried in the bathroom mirror. She was not entirely changed, no, but something had shifted. A quiet awakening had begun inside her, like spring sunlight melting the last frost. It started with little things. She signed up for a yoga class. She began sketching again. She walked through the park without headphones, letting herself hear the world for once. And slowly, she stopped avoiding mirrors. Instead of glaring at her reflection, she looked longer. She touched her collarbone. She adjusted her posture. Some mornings she even smiled. That was the Claire Julian saw the day he invited her into his photography studio. "I'm working on something called Inner Light," he had said gently over coffee. "Portraits of people learning to see themselves differently. I would like you to be part of it." Claire hesitated. Her old instincts screamed to shrink away, but her new self, still fragile but braver, nodded. The studio was minimalist, warm-toned wood floors, soft white walls. Gentle music played in the background. Still, when Claire stepped in, her hands trembled slightly. Each spotlight felt like a ghost of every judgmental glance she'd ever endured. Every footstep forward was a confrontation with the voice in her head that had whispered, "You are never enough." Julian stood a few feet away, adjusting the lights. He didn't rush her, didn't instruct. He simply said, "Just breathe. And be yourself." Claire exhaled slowly, eyes cast downward. The camera clicked once. She flinched. Julian didn't speak to her directly at first. Instead, he spoke to the light, to the space, to the invisible stories that lived between silence and stillness. "I remember the first day she walked into my office," he said softly, more to the air than to anyone. Eyes lowered, voice almost a whisper. But in her hand, there was this sketchbook. And in it, I saw someone who still believed in beauty, even when the world had told her she wasn't part of it. Claire blinked. He continued, "I used to think medicine was the only way to heal, but now I know healing has more than one language. Sometimes it's graphite on paper. Sometimes it's showing up to your own life, even when it hurts." Her eyes met his. Slowly, a single tear traced down her cheek, not from pain but recognition. The next photos captured something different. Her shoulders relaxed. Her lips parted. There was no forced smile, but there was presence. Realness. She wasn't hiding anymore. Later, Julian handed her the first printed photo. Claire held it in both hands, her breath catching. "This is me," she whispered, tears surfacing again. "Yes," Julian said, his voice low and warm, "the way I have always seen you, strong, whole, beautiful in a way too many people are too afraid to name." Claire looked up at him. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she took a step forward. And another. Close now. Close enough that her fingertips brushed his. Julian didn't move. He didn't need to. In that moment, he wasn't her doctor. He wasn't even her photographer. He was simply a man who had seen her, layer by layer, not as something to be fixed, but as someone becoming. And she was done hiding. The world spun, and then it vanished. Claire did not remember the fall, only that the supermarket lights had seemed too bright, her legs too heavy, and her breath too shallow. She had been reaching for the cheaper cereal on the top shelf, ignoring the pounding in her head and the shaking in her hands. Then everything had gone black. When she came to, she was no longer under fluorescent lights or surrounded by aisles of cardboard boxes. She was on her couch, wrapped in the thick blue knit blanket her mother had sent her years ago. The air smelled of chicken soup, rich and comforting, and a hint of lemon, like someone had opened a bottle of essential oil nearby. The room was quiet, washed in the golden glow of a single lamp. The rain tapped softly against the window. It felt like she had stepped out of the chaos of her life and into a still photograph. Then she saw him. Julian was asleep in the armchair across from her, his frame curved awkwardly to one side, a paperback balanced loosely in his hand. His chest rose and fell gently. His other hand rested on the armrest, open, relaxed. Vulnerable. Claire blinked, slowly shifting upright. The blanket slipped off her shoulder, revealing the familiar worn-out t-shirt she had worn earlier that day, now damp with sweat. She glanced at the book in Julian's lap. The Courage to Love Yourself. Her breath caught. Taut. Julian stirred as if he had felt the shift in the room. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then clear and sharp the moment they locked onto hers. "You're awake," he said softly, the tension in his shoulders falling away. "Thank God." Claire tried to sit up straighter, but her body ached. "What happened?" "You fainted," Julian replied, moving to sit at the edge of the couch. "I happened to be there. The manager was calling an ambulance, but I panicked. I brought you here instead. I hope that was okay." Claire nodded slowly. "More than okay." He leaned in, brushed the back of his hand gently against her forehead. "No more fever. You must have pushed yourself too hard." She closed her eyes briefly at the touch. His skin was warm, steadying. There was silence between them, not awkward, but full of the words they had not yet spoken, of the emotions that had been building for weeks. Claire opened her eyes again, studying his face in the soft light, the worry etched into his brow, the gentleness in his mouth, the careful quiet he always carried like a shield. "Why?" she whispered. Julian tilted his head. "Why what?" "Why are you like this?" Her voice cracked. "Why are you so kind to me?" He looked down at the book in his hand, thumb brushing over the title. "Because real beauty doesn't demand attention," he said at last. "It just needs someone to witness it, quietly, completely." Claire bit her lip. Her throat burned. She turned her face to the side, not to hide the tears that threatened, but to contain them, to feel them fully without breaking apart. Then, a knock at the door. Both of them stiffened. Julian stood. "Want me to get that?" Claire nodded, suddenly cold. He walked across the room and opened the door. There, dripping in the rain, stood Tyler. He looked different, less polished, more desperate. His smile faltered when he saw Julian. But then his eyes flicked to Claire, lingering, calculating. "You look good," he said, confident, sexy even. "I'd been thinking maybe we rushed things. Maybe we could try again." Claire stood, blanket falling from her shoulders. She walked forward, slow and sure. Rainlight flickered in her hair. Her voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "I'm not the girl you left behind, Tyler, and I will never again be the woman waiting for you to come back." Tyler's expression shifted, confused, angry, but he said nothing. Julian watched from behind her, silent but solid. And then Tyler turned and walked away. Claire closed the door. The lock clicked softly. She turned to Julian. "You did not have to save me," she said. Julian looked into her eyes. "I did not," he replied. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you it was possible." In that quiet, something new bloomed, not loud, not rushed. Just real. Just enough. Trust. Claire's world blinked out without warning. She was reaching for a carton of almond milk in the dimly lit aisle of the 24-hour supermarket, trying to focus through the fatigue clouding her mind. Her vision blurred. The buzzing fluorescent lights overhead seemed to stretch and flicker. She barely registered the thud of her knees hitting the floor before everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer at the store. She was home. Her apartment was dim and quiet. She was lying on the couch, wrapped in the knit blanket she kept for cold nights. The air smelled faintly of lemon and something warm, chicken soup maybe. The table lamp cast a golden glow across the room. And there, sitting a few feet away in the armchair, slumped sideways with a book in his lap, was Julian. For a moment Claire thought she was dreaming, but then her throat burned with thirst and her arms trembled slightly as she sat up. Julian stirred. His eyes blinked open, hazy with sleep, until he saw her and instantly leaned forward, his expression etched with concern. "You're awake," he said gently. His voice was quiet, but relief threaded every word. Claire nodded slowly. "What happened?" "You fainted. I was just grabbing something for dinner. I saw you collapse and rushed over. You were burning up." He paused, sitting forward to feel her forehead with the back of his hand. Still warm, but better than earlier. She stared at him, at the way his brows furrowed when he checked her pulse, at the bowl of soup on the coffee table, still steaming faintly. He had stayed. He had taken care of her. Her voice cracked. "You didn't have to do all this." He looked at her, then at the book in his lap, The Courage to Love Yourself. He gave a half smile. "Maybe I didn't," he said, "but I wanted to." Claire's throat tightened. "Why?" Julian hesitated, then set the book down. "Because you matter. Not just as a patient, not just because of what you've been through, but because you're someone who forgot how worthy she is, and someone had to remind you." Claire blinked, tears pricking her eyes. Just then, a sharp knock echoed through the quiet apartment. She tensed. Julian stood and walked to the door, glancing back at her. She nodded faintly. He opened the door and froze. Tyler stood there. "Bye." His hair was wet from the rain, and the grin he wore faltered when he saw Julian. Still, he stepped forward, hands tucked into his designer jacket. "I saw the video," he said. "The blog. Everything. You've changed, Claire. You look good. Confident. Sexy." Claire stood slowly, heart pounding, not with fear but clarity. Tyler smiled. "Maybe we could try again. Maybe this time it could work." Claire met his eyes, steady and cold. "I'm not the girl you walked away from," she said, "and I'll never be the woman who waits for you to return." Tyler blinked. Julian remained behind her, silent and unmoving. Tyler opened his mouth as if to speak again, but no words came. He turned and walked away, rain falling behind him. Claire closed the door with a click. Her hand rested on the wood for a moment, breathing slowly. When she turned back, Julian was still there. "I should have said that a long time ago," she whispered. Julian stepped forward, his voice quiet. "You said it when it mattered." She looked at him, really looked. The man who'd seen her without armor. The one who never once tried to fix her. Just stood by and believed. "You didn't just carry me home tonight," she said softly. "You reminded me that I have one." Julian reached out, took her hand. "You built that home, Claire. I just made sure the lights stayed on." And as her fingers curled into his, Claire knew this wasn't rescue. This was love, patient and real, in the quiet that followed the storm. Claire's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked, a silent heartbeat on the empty screen. Outside, the rain tapped a soft rhythm against the fogged-up window pane, and inside her apartment, every corner held its breath. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the faint ticking of the wall clock, the distant sound of tires on wet pavement, everything was still. Everything but her. Her heart trembled beneath her ribs, not out of fear, but anticipation. The kind of quiet shiver that comes when you are about to name something you were once afraid to look at. She inhaled deeply and began to type. From scars to courage. Wah. It was the phrase she had whispered to herself in her darkest hours, the ones between midnight and morning, when the world was silent and self-doubt screamed the loudest, when she lay awake wondering if the pain would ever be more than just pain, if her story would ever be more than just survival. It was not a title. It was a vow. The blog was her space now, not curated, not filtered, real, soft in some places, raw in others, like her own heart learning to beat again. In her first post, Claire did not talk about breast implants or body image, about betrayal or beauty. Instead, she wrote about shame, the kind of shame that wraps around your voice until it forgets how to speak, the kind that makes you shrink in your own clothes, apologize for your presence, hide in pictures. She wrote about silence, how it can be louder than anything when it fills the space between who you are and who the world tells you to be. She wrote about the boy who made her feel like she was too little, too plain, too play. And she wrote about the man who saw her without asking her to change. She wrote about looking in the mirror for the first time without checking for flaws, but instead asking, "How do you feel today?" And then listening, really listening. She ended the post with a single sentence that had taken her 3 weeks and countless tears to write. "I am not a before or after photo. I am a person, and I am learning to love her." She stared at the sentence for a long time before she clicked publish. Then came the response. At first, a few comments, then dozens, then hundreds. Within a day, there were thousands. Messages flooded her inbox, some typed in perfect grammar, others messy and chaotic and full of exclamation marks and emojis. But they all held the same heartbeat. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't. You made me feel seen." I cried reading this. I thought I was alone. And then there was the message from a 17-year-old girl in Kansas. Claire read it at least 10 times, eyes blurry, hands trembling. "I used to think I had to be beautiful to be brave, but you showed me I only have to be brave to be me." Claire printed that letter, cut it carefully with shaky hands, and taped it to her mirror. Every morning she read it before brushing her teeth. It reminded her why she had started, why she would not stop. With each new post, some hopeful, some full of doubt, some half-finished but honest, Julian would quietly share the link. No fanfare, no long captions. But always, always a message would arrive in her inbox not long after. "You are the embodiment of healing." Those 6 words never failed to stop her in her tracks. One afternoon, Claire sat by the window, her laptop warming her knees, a cup of tea in her hand. She stared at a photo she had taken days earlier, her reflection in a puddle, rain falling like tiny comets across the surface. The image was imperfect, blurred, fragmented. She had titled it Becoming. She posted it without a caption. That night, a woman wrote to her, "That image? That's how I feel every morning. Like I'm still coming into focus. But I'm still standing." Claire wrote back, simply, "Standing is enough. You're still here. That's powerful." And that was when she understood. This blog, this space was no longer just for her. She had become a mirror, a voice, a gentle lighthouse for women still finding their shore. She was not writing from pain anymore. She was writing from power. Not the kind that screams. The kind that grows, like roots in quiet soil, like wings in a silent room. And when a reader would write, "You help me see myself," Claire would smile, hand on her heart, and whisper to herself, "You help me see myself too." The gallery was small, tucked between an old bookstore and a flower shop in downtown Seattle. From the outside, it looked ordinary: brick walls, a single glass door, soft yellow lights glowing behind white curtains. But inside it carried the kind of silence that asked people to listen with their hearts, not just their eyes. Claire hesitated at the threshold. It had been a year since she last saw Julian. Their lives had crossed, unraveled, and rewoven in ways neither of them expected. And now he had invited her here. No details, just a message. "There's something I want to show you." She stepped inside. Ah! The air was warm and faintly scented with lavender. The lights were dim, focused only on one wall at the back of the gallery, where a single frame hung. It was a watercolor. Claire froze. She knew the image instantly. The small girl sitting in the corner of a dark room. And behind her, the faintest outline of wings, unfolding, becoming. That same sketch she had once scribbled in her journal, when she felt invisible, when she was trying, just barely, to survive. But here, it was not in pencil. It was in color. Soft purples, hopeful blues, golden light bleeding in through cracks she had not drawn before. Julian had painted this. She took a trembling step closer, eyes glistening. Beneath the frame, engraved into the wooden plaque, were the words, "You are my most beautiful recovery." A voice behind her, soft, familiar. "Claire." She turned. "Why?" Julian stood there, no white coat, no clipboard. Just a man in a simple button-down shirt, eyes filled with something deeper than admiration. Reverence. Love. He took a slow breath. "I have been part of many healings. Watched countless scars fade, seen strength return to bodies I once feared might never move again. But none of them," he paused, voice shaking slightly, "none of them changed me the way you did." Claire stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Julian continued, his voice steady now. "I do not want to be your doctor anymore, Claire. I want to be the person who walks beside you, not in silence, not in distance, but hand in hand, through whatever comes next." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny velvet pouch. Claire's breath caught. Inside was a ring, not gold, not diamond, but simple silver. Engraved on the inside, breathe. Shine. Choose. Julian knelt, not out of tradition, but out of truth. Will you choose me, Claire Weston, as I have already chosen you? Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Not from surprise, not from fear, but from knowing. She took his hand and dropped to her knees with him, eye to eye. For the first time in my life, she whispered, I choose myself, and I choose you. He smiled, wide and full of quiet joy, as he slid the ring onto her finger. They didn't kiss immediately. Instead, they rested their foreheads together, soaking in the stillness that had once felt like isolation, but now felt like home. Later, they sat on the gallery floor, backs against the wall, fingers entwined. Claire leaned her head on Julian's shoulder. You turned my pain into art, she said softly. You turned it into light, he replied. Outside, the sky darkened into twilight. Inside, the painting glowed like a lantern, proof that even the smallest wings, once noticed, can change everything. Sometimes the deepest scars do not show on skin, but in silence, in shame, in the stories we're too afraid to tell. Claire Weston was once a girl who hid her body, her voice, her truth. But through pain, through stillness, and through one man who truly saw her, she discovered something far greater than beauty. She found worth. She found healing. She found love. And maybe, so can you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Every week we bring you powerful, real-life inspired tales of transformation, hope, and the kind of love that heals from the inside out. Because your soul deserves stories that stir it. Subscribe now, and let your heart be moved.